Welcome to The Spawn Chunks, episode number 373 for Monday, October 27th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms in video on YouTube and Spotify. If you're enjoying listening to the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Jonny, but the internet knows me as Pixelriffs, and joining me is the latest generation of Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Yes, I am the XS version 2.1.7, if anybody is wondering how that works. And don't worry, because I don't know how it works either. If you want to hear about retro tech, if you want to hear about Lego builds, if you want to hear about home innovation and home automation, that's some of the things that we were talking about in the Render Distance this week on the show. That's the pre-show where we sit down and talk with our patrons here live in the Discord. If you want to support, go to patreon.com/thespawnchunks. You get extra content every single week. You get extra content once a month with the Minecraft Hangout. And coming up this weekend, actually, we're going to be doing the Minecraft Hangout and the quarterly Hangout where Jonny and I go over the downloads, the numbers, and how the show is doing, plans for the future, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of bonus content if you head over to patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
On this week's show, we're going to be discussing the latest snapshot. Spears make you hungry now. So we're going to be unpacking the latest changes to the Mounts of Mayhem weapon and other bits and pieces in this week's main discussion. But first, as always, we like to do our quick login and talk about what's new in our Minecraft lives. So we'll kick off with you, Joel. What's new on the Citadel?
So I have been puttering around on the Mushroom Island and taking care of some logistics and preparing things. I'm thinking about the kind of textures and kind of blocks I may want to build with. Thinking about just sci-fi stuff, powers, crystals, lights, color, because of course I've been working in gray and brown forever in the West Hill build. So the first thing I did was finish off the redstone for the Amethyst farm, which is a large geode underneath the main area. So it's close enough to be loaded in all the time. The redstone is a bunch of spaghetti. It was never meant to be efficient off the start. I did end up adding a second water tray, so things where the crystals that were pushed off by pistons at the top of the farm would end up hitting other crystals at the bottom of the farm. There was enough room there vertically to put a water collection system in there, so I decided to try that out. And even after all that, and the addition of a clock timer, I really misunderstood how long it took crystals to grow. So I followed a link that the Wormbo had sent me live on stream and learned how to make a compound clock that was designed by El Mango for his very cool flying machine build for collecting crystals. And I get a whopping 32 crystals every 2.5 hours. So
Yeah.
Now, a good chunk of that is because it's not meant to be lossless. I was not paying attention at all. I just hooked up as many pistons as I possibly could. It's not even supposed to be pretty. I'm sure a lot of the crystals are sitting on top of pistons. And so I went out and I found a pillager outpost. I think our third pillager outpost, and we found some allays. I got 2. I brought them back to the island. So now I've got a couple of allays. So I'm planning on duplicating those and putting 1 or 2 of them in the farm with the hopes that we will increase the yield for the amethyst crystals, because I would like to build some custom crystals. Something that I explained briefly with a temporary build on the server was the idea of building a large kind of hovering crystal and then having a bunch of power cables coming off of it somehow to make it look like whatever we're doing is being powered by something on the land, even though it's just make-believe. Just kind of give me some sort of infrastructure to then say, okay, well, I've got this farm. Where's the crystal that powers it? How do I build it? Where do I put it? Is it powered by the one next door? Like, what happens to all this stuff? So I'm just trying to come up with some cool technical things to I guess, interpret and make up as I go along. And I could build them out of amethyst blocks with purple glass and magenta glass panes and floating panes. And like, there's a bunch of different things I could do, probably with some pearlescent frog lights in there to make things look cool and lit up. I am playing with shaders mostly these days, so you get a really cool glow effect off of glass and things like that. So that's the plan. And really, I didn't get much farther than that because it was a little bit disappointing with the geode farm. So I didn't bother to decorate it because I don't know if it's going to stay that way. I may eventually figure out how to build the same sort of farm that Il Mango built. I did not grab the link to the video, but I will try to remember it for the show notes. And essentially what it was a 3-direction flying machine system where he just took a cross section of all the holes in the geode and flew a flying machine through it on the x-axis on the z-axis and then vertically on the y-axis, one at a time. And so he's able to collect 100% of the crystals, and they all just get bounced into where they're going. Like it's a really, really slick idea, because if any crystals land on a block or something after one direction, they get pushed off by the flying machine that comes from the other direction. And it's a really wild looking build. So worth looking up for people that haven't already. I also went through and did a bunch of infrastructure stuff. So as I'm flying around, I'm realizing I'm going through rockets a lot. I'm going through a lot of golden carrots to feed myself as I'm doing a lot of mining and all that kind of stuff. So I added a quick golden carrot situation where I'm still getting gold from the piglin farm in the nether, the donut farm we've had for ages, because it's still so fast, even with the change to XP and the fact that you have to hit the piglins to get the XP from them. A simple auto clicker on my mouse, and I can sit there with chat for 10 minutes, maybe not even, and get 30 levels. So it's really cool in that way. But then I made a little villager carrot farm, and it's a simple 9x9, 2 villagers, one's a farmer, the other one's just sitting behind a hopper minecart, getting carrots thrown at him, and like it's already got nearly a shulker box full of carrots. So it's very, very basic, but certainly doing me. And that's what I'm hoping to achieve with the sci-fi area. Like I don't need thousands of items per minute. I'm just happy with some of these things providing me with enough infrastructure to continue to play in the area. And that's kind of like my mission right now, is like, what do I need to get going? What do I want to have available to me so I'm not hamstrung when creativity really strikes and I want to build something cool? How can I just not be stuck? And so I've been going over things like dye farms, frog light farms. I want to come up and make a list of all the light blocks that I might want to use in the game. So end rods, copper bulbs, all that stuff, and see what I can make automatically, see what I need to farm to get those to be something that I can continually have, because I think I'm going to be using a lot of light, as I have been experimenting with some basic shapes and some ideas of using lights either below roads. I'm not even sure if I need roads. Where we're going, we don't need roads. Also just like having lights inlaid in the building, not that you're looking directly at them, but if you have like a layer of concrete for color, a layer of lights to light up the concrete, and then something dark, usually with like a stair block, so stone or deep slate or something over top of that, then it looks like this cool like overlay in a building or structural part of a building that has like this glowing interior on the inside. So I've been messing around with that, and basically it's just this list of things that I want to get done. And one of the first things, of course, is getting all the dyes. And surprisingly, there's quite a bit that you can get from the 4 too tall flowers in a bone meal farm. You're pretty much set, like for a lot of the colors. The things that are the hardest are anything related to blue. We still don't have a really reliable way to get blue. And I'm on a mushroom island. You know what doesn't grow on a mushroom island? Flowers at all, ever, anywhere. Not even in a lush cave. You can't get anything. And then in the ocean, it's like poppies and dandelions, which I already have yellow and red with roses and sunflowers. So I'm thinking, thanks to someone mentioning it in chat, of breeding up a villager or two into clerics and then trading rotten flesh for emeralds and then emeralds for lapis, and having that be my renewable blue dye. It's unique. I've never done it, so that could be kind of fun. But it also means I need to build a giant mob farm somewhere that's going to be pumping out zombie flesh. So we have the zombie flesh coming from the zombified piglin farm in the nether, but it's not on the island. Like, it's not something that's going to be running in the background. It's only going to be running whenever I go for levels, which is not to say it's bad, because like we have to go there a lot. So there's things like that. It's all the infrastructure stuff. It's been a little frustrating, I have to say, on stream, because I don't feel like I've accomplished much. I leave a 3-hour stream having built nothing. I've only just collected allays, organized some plans, cut down a bunch of mushrooms, which I'm doing once a stream now, taking like the first day or two in Minecraft, like 20 minutes, and just cutting down an arc of mushrooms as I get farther and farther from the central point. There's a lot of mushrooms on a mushroom island, like a lot. So my server mates are getting presents of like, here's a shulker box full of red mushroom blocks. I don't know what you need it for, but I don't want it. So here, take it. And the shulker box is kind of a gift as well. But I just don't know how to really expand my inspirational horizons yet without changing the landscape somehow. And I feel like removing the mushrooms is helping me think about things as like a clean slate. Because right now I look out and I just see Mushroom Island, and I'm trying to like see past it. And I think right now removing the mushrooms is like the first step to seeing past it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting working on a Mushroom Island. You have a couple of distinct advantages. Like looking at some of the screenshots that you've given us here, the one that really strikes me is the one that shot of the bamboo farm front and center, where you've got like the stripes of frog lights, which incidentally, because you can only see one plane of the frog lights, kind of looks like a very thin beam that sort of reminds me of like the light cycles from Tron, the way they have like the kind of the beams coming out the back of them. And so I'm instantly reminded of that and thinking, could you do something that feels a bit like the grid in Tron, but then you'd have such a limited color palette that I think it'd be kind of difficult to pull that off, and dealing with the day-night cycle. But that's the other part of this, is that on a Mushroom Island, aside from occasionally having to make sure you get in bed to prevent phantoms from spawning, you also have the opportunity of working at night without too much obstruction from mobs. And so I think, especially with a sci-fi build, it might be kind of fun to see what you could do about like having stuff that looked better at nighttime and exploring and building more at nighttime, and using like the stars above you as kind of like an inspiration for the sci-fi nature of things, like, or at least like allowing yourself more time at night to consider how things look, and you know whether or not the build works at nighttime versus at daytime being part of the consideration here. So I think if not inspiration, that's at least food for thought.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's why I'm on the island, is because I knew I wanted to make large builds, sci-fi related, dark neon type stuff, and not have to light it all up consistently to prevent mob spawns. Even in situations where, like, say you're building the top of a large flat building, it would have to be all slabs if you wanted it to stay dark, or have carpet or something on it, right? If you wanted to have it be blocks, you'd have to light it up somehow. And granted, it's a little bit easier now where like it just has to be a light level of 1 to prevent a mob spawn. You don't have to light things up like a Christmas tree. But that's why I'm in the Mushroom Island. The challenge, of course, for me is making sure that I've also lit up the caves underneath, so that when I do want to make some mob farms, they actually work. But I think I've been really kind of thinking on the kind of things I need. Like, for example, the rocket farm that I want to make. And rather than trying to get gunpowder from the creeper farm that's in the large lush cave, I'm thinking about maybe making multiple farms. Like, rather than creating a creeper farm that pumps out a ton of stuff, what if I just find like a little lush cave pocket underground and make a creeper farm that makes just enough gunpowder to make rockets? And like that, it like, so the rocket farm would have its own sugarcane farm, it would have its own gunpowder farm, and then it would just make that one thing. And if I wanted to make TNT, or if I wanted to make other things later on, I would make another creeper farm in maybe a larger area, or like that kind of stuff. So I'm thinking that those kind of functions are going to be like the underlying reasons for the builds, and then therefore I'm not trying to just constantly build boxes around farms on the surface. So it gives me more freedom to, like you said, build at night, come up with some cool stuff. I have seen the trailers for the new Tron movie, and I like that idea. Like, I like those kind of shapes. I don't know if I want to go quite that stark, because there's just a lot of black. Like, it seems to be there's a lot of no color. As bright as it seems in the trailer, high contrast, it's just a lot of red with a lot of black behind it. And so I think I want to try to do something a little bit more than that. Also, we don't have a lot of colors in terms of the light sources. Like, frog lights are probably the most robust. A lot of the other light sources are either orange or white. There's not really an in-between. So I'm curious to see how I can fix that. I know that a trick that I used in the Nether Hub was putting lights out of sight and then putting stained glass over top of them, and having that glass kind of like act like a colored light, which works much better with shaders on, obviously. So I'll try to experiment with that in terms of, like, if you had like a blue concrete with a purple glass on top of it, it changes the color of the concrete a little bit. So it makes it like you've got different shades of purple in the concrete, but it also means that you have to plan for walls that are like 5 or 6 blocks thick, which is cool. Like, I'm up for that. I want things to be really chunky. I feel like I'm leaning into like a brutalist level of of sci-fi. I don't have an image, but I saw either something on YouTube or something on ArtStation where it really felt like these buildings were almost, they looked kind of like batteries. They had like a narrow spot where they attached to the ground. They had these big industrial feet on them, but then they rose up in these big kind of cuboid shapes, and they had numbers on them. So it kind of like looked industrial, like this is cell number 1 and cell number 3, and like who knows what's going on inside, whether it's drilling or processing or smelting or something. So I think it could be kind of fun to have that level of depth, and then have each individual building have its own purpose. I'm just on the fence right now of, do I want to have those things produced and stored in those buildings, or do I want to have them produced in the buildings and then sent to a central building where I then have like my main storage area? Which I like that idea for convenience, but it also seems to be like that's what everybody does in Minecraft.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to figure out like, how much do I want to store shulker boxes full of stuff and shulker box loaders, or do I want to say like, oh, I need more rockets? It's a good excuse to walk across the build to the rocket factory and pick up some more rockets. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I want to handle that yet. So there's the central building is still very much on the fence, which is, it's difficult. There's a lot of design and decision, because like I want to build like something around the shulker farm, but I don't know how big to make it, because I don't know how big the central building is. And so I don't want them to like touch or overlap or be too close. So there's just a lot of indecision right now. So I think what I'm going to do is, for something a little bit different on stream, is maybe do like a bonus stream or something where I'm just like cruising ArtStation and cruising Pinterest, looking for like sci-fi art and concept art and ideas and shapes and things like that, and to try to get some ideas for going forward.
Yeah, well, if it feels like you haven't got a lot done, then as an outside observer, it feels like you have got a lot done, or at least it feels like you're playing broadly. I think at this point is the interesting thing, is like having been focused on a project like West Hill, where you're doing one task sort of to completion. You're building like a house, or you're landscaping this part of the river or whatever. There's like a lot of tasks that feel like they have a beginning and an end, whereas now I think you're in that process of trying to find a direction for this project. It feels like you're at least touching a lot of different bases, like a lot of different parts of the game. And I'll provide a contrasting example from the Minecraft Survival Guide. I have just been digging a hole yet again. It's the only time I've had a chance to play Minecraft this week, because we've had a family visit. My father-in-law's here, so I'm not playing Minecraft quite as much between streams. And on the one stream I was able to get done, we finished the beacon dig. So I'm now at Y0 in this room. I'm planning to build 1/4 of my copper aging machine here before I dig out the remaining space that I will need for the other 3/4 or so of it. And I decided I will be using other mining methods once we reach deep slate in the other segments, because mining out the last 2 layers of this area, which is about 110 by 110, it's about the maximum reach that I could get with a beacon before haste completely left me. It took about 3 hours just to dig out 2 layers of this room, because it's deep slate, and deep slate can't be insta-mined. Even with the little like nodes of granite and diorite and that kind of thing, like it was still like a chore to get the last part of this done. So definitely moss mining the next part of that. And some people suggested TNT as I went. Obviously, a lot of people sort of come in and ask why you're not using TNT, and my answers remain the same. It's too messy, it's too expensive, I can't keep the blocks. I'm not at the phase where I've introduced TNT duping, so I either have to go and craft a lot of TNT, or I have to introduce TNT duping for the series and then justify why I'm using it in this space. And I don't know if you've ever tried to build anything TNT duping based. It's usually better on the surface in the sky where it can move freely, as opposed to in a cave. If you're building a TNT duper in a cavern, you have to clear out a lot of space just for it to exist to begin with before you can use it. And ideally you're using it for like an indeterminate amount of area. Like if you're using a tunnel bore, for example, you just kind of want to go until you're done. Whereas with this area, I want it to be a specific size and then stop. So TNT is never quite the ideal solution for a project like this. So I've considered it, the pros and cons. As far as the rest of this goes, I'm still not certain about decorations. That's the next thing I need to really think about, is what I'm going to do with the look of this space, because I definitely don't want it to keep looking like a natural cave. I want to have a big room down here, and it's not necessarily going to be a rectangular prism shaped room. I do want it to be in some fashion like a little bit more architectural than that. But the main thing is the floor, because I'm planning on building some of the mechanism at floor level, for which I'll probably end up replacing some of these blocks just in case I dig around it, or just for the aesthetics of the thing. I want to make sure that it's got like a flat floor that I can put redstone dust on and it looks decent. But ideally in some other areas I want to slab the floor, because slimes have been spawning. As you might imagine, as I start digging out the space, I encounter a couple of slime spawning chunks, and I don't want them spawning while I'm using the machine. I also ideally don't want other mobs spawning while I'm using it, but the main thing is slimes will spawn at any light level, so regardless of how I light this area up, I'm still going to get them if I don't do something about them spawn-proofing another way. And the mechanism, when it's in, is going to have enough gaps, because, of course, the ideal spacing for copper is 4 blocks apart, so there are areas of the mechanism where it's not too tightly clustered together. And I expect there will be ample room for slimes to spawn, unless I was very specific about how I planned that out. So I'm still not sure material-wise what I want to do, what I'm going for in terms of theme or like a color scheme or anything like that. I want the circuitry to stand out from whatever's in the background. So, I could do it on like a completely black concrete floor and like, deep slate slabs or something like that if I wanted to, but it really depends what I've got the materials for and what I think ultimately fits the theme. But that part of the project, I'm sort of at the stage where you are, where I'm sort of like considering how exactly do I want to decorate this, and I'm not quite certain where to go with it yet.
It's a hard place to be when you're excited to build something, but then you're like, I've done all this prep and it's been a grind and I'm ready to go. But oh wait, I've been so busy with prep, I haven't really given any thought to design, color, palette, texture, how I want to handle slimes. Like and you're like, oh wait, I can't start yet. Like I need to backpedal a second and kind of figure out what's happening next. I feel you. Like that's difficult. And I do remember popping by the stream and even with the beacons going, wow, that deep slate is really taking a long time.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I noticed it on my dig when I was just doing those cross tunnels, and I was just doing a 2x1. Like I was not being anything, being fancy at all. And for you to have to clear off this entire space, like it just must be taking an eon, because it feels so slow. And I remember thinking, like, when you hit like a pocket of diorite, you're actually relieved to see diorite. Like, yay, diorite, because of course it pops like popcorn. The next 30 blocks are gone in seconds, and you're like, all right, now we're back to deep slate again. One block at a time. I wish that there was more that we could do with beacons. I kind of feel like beacons are something that could be upgraded. They've been around so long, and there's been enough material and different things added to the game in terms of verticality and all the things that are there. I feel like there could be an update to beacons that would make endgame a little bit more enjoyable for survival players specifically.
Yeah, if we could just have a haste 3 that would let me mine deep slate, I'd be fine with that. Although I think the actual number you need is like haste 4 and efficiency 3 or something, or efficiency 6, something along those lines. Who knows? But it's it's getting there at least. I'm now at the point where I can build something in this space, and I might actually start on the redstone circuitry, figure out what blocks I want to use for that, and then use that to determine what color palette the rest of the room has, because then at least it's a bit of a smaller choice, and I can just kind of roll with whatever I end up with. But yeah, who knows? It's going to be an ongoing project, and I'm looking forward to having more to share than just I've dug out more of this space. But for now, at least we can move on into the news, because there's a lot more exciting stuff happening there. This week, Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W43A was released. It was published Tuesday, October 21st, and the new features include spears, now dealing more damage through charge attacks dealt by players, but also charge attacks from mobs. The spear model is now slightly larger, and spears now provide visual feedback when they hit a target with the charge attack. The Lunge enchantment has changed significantly as well. Using Lunge no longer consumes durability on the spear. It now consumes hunger points by exhausting the player, similar to how sprinting or jumping works. Level 1 Lunge consumes 3 hunger points, Level 2 consumes 4 hunger points, and Level 3 consumes 5 hunger points. So Lunge can now only be used if the player has at least 6 hunger points or 3 shanks worth of hunger in their hunger bar. Changes in 25W43A, just one small thing here. The Nautilus and Zombie Nautilus can no longer be placed in boats. There's a bit more in the technical changes. The data pack version is now 91.0, which brings some changes to the world border and loot functions, and a new enchantment entity effect that applies exhaustion the way Lunge now does. The resource pack version is now 71.0, which brings some new changes to mip maps, restores animated mip map textures for animated blocks, and translucent texture support for beacons and redstone dust. Fixed bugs of note in this snapshot, one being the world border can change in size when the game is paused. The world border is now dependent on whether the game is actually running. Banners sometimes showing incorrect textures when viewed from some angles, mobs with spears dealing too little damage, piglins and hoglins being able to zombify in the nether, and zombified piglins attacking players in creative mode. Those have been fixed along with a bunch of other bug fixes, and the full list of technical details can be found in the Minecraft.net changelog that's linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com. This week, we also got an update from the developers on the road to vibrant visuals on Java. This was published October 22nd. In this brief article, the developers updated us on the progress of Vibrant Visuals for Java Edition. Quote, "One of our objectives right now is to modernize our rendering code. Instead of rendering the game on the main thread, we want to introduce a second thread that is dedicated only to rendering. To enable this, we're going through the code system by system and preparing it for the extraction of the game state from the main thread, which will then be used for rendering on the dedicated rendering thread. This work is mostly complete for entities, block entities, particles, and the UI. Next, we plan to tackle chunks and some small leftovers." The article goes on to explain the developers have created a dedicated Discord channel on their feedback Discord, specifically for shader creators and resource pack creators to join and provide feedback, but confirmed that new announcements will not take place through this Discord. So only join if you're a resource pack creator or a shader pack creator and you want to give your feedback on the changes. Once again, you can find the full details over at Minecraft.net, and the article is linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
So I know that you want to talk about the changes to the spear in the main discussion this week, and I am at least very interested to see that there's been an update with the progress for Vibrant Visuals for Java. And I think it's great that they let everybody know that there is some progress being made, what is happening behind the scenes, because it strikes me as something that is very technical and very difficult to showcase as you go through it, until probably closer to the end when you have more visual stuff to show off. And so I think it's great that they're letting people know, as I feel like it's been popping up here on the show, certainly in our community, even just in the greater Minecraft community. It's like, hey, what's going on with Vibrant Visuals? Is there anything happening in terms of progress? We've seen some rendering engine updates and some way that certain things are handled in snapshots leading up to the Copper Age, and now again with Mounts of Mayhem. And I think it's just great that they're letting everybody know, hey, there's a lot of stuff technically happening behind the scenes. Not a lot to show for it. We're just going through code. I do hope, though, when they get to a point where they can share some visuals, that we also get a developer diary or something on the Minecraft YouTube channel. I would love to see and hear more about the behind the scenes, because it's not just something brand new. It's like we have to retrofit this 15, 16-year-old game for it to work with these new graphics. What were the technical hurdles? What were the sacrifices? What were the things that you're trying to do? Even just the decisions as to the style of Vibrant Visuals as well, like the pixelated shadows. They talked a little bit about that when they first announced it, but I'd like to hear a lot more about that. And I would be on board for a behind the scenes video to showcase, especially because there's obviously a lot of people putting in a lot of hard work behind the scenes, right?
For sure. They prefaced the article by saying, we're going to get a little bit technical here, so if the technical under the hood stuff is not necessarily your jam, don't worry about it. We'll be back with a future update which will say a little bit more. But I do think they've done a really good job lately, especially, of communicating changes in a fairly clear and concise way. They obviously have a certain amount of the formatting of snapshot change logs that takes a little bit of getting used to. We've talked in the past about how the bug change logs are often a little bit odd because of the way people submit bugs when they sort of write out the title. That's the title that gets used in the changelog, and so it's not always certain which half of the issue got fixed. But I think the thing they're doing here is at least letting people know that Vibrant Visuals is still on the way, and they're very good at communicating in a concise way, especially on the YouTube videos. They do a really good job of sort of, whether it's scripting or just they have folks who are very articulate off the cuff, explaining these in a way that most players can understand. And so when you say to a player, we're trying to split the rendering of the game from the gameplay, the sort of part of the code that drives the gameplay and actually allows this stuff to happen, most players are going to understand that, because the Minecraft audience, purely from the sort of type of game that it is, becomes fairly tech savvy by playing. Like, even just the terminology of the game, like mobs, for example, is a term that's been used in video games for a really long time. But since there was no real group term to describe both hostile creatures and passive creatures like animals and stuff, mobs became sort of what the Minecraft community referred to them as, and that term stuck around to the point where most players, if you talk to a game developer and they're talking about mobs, they'll know what that means. And so I think Minecraft is doing a really good job at teaching players in a sort of soft way how some of this stuff actually functions behind the scenes, which is going to leave players with a little bit more of the technical know-how of how other games are made, and potentially make them more considerate to other development teams in the process.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely. And I think it's also good for players to understand how complicated something like changing the graphics or changing the lighting, or even just the people that are doing shader packs or texture packs. I guess someone that's done a couple of custom textures on my own, and the amount of work that goes into getting that right, or the repetition that goes into doing that when you arrive at something that you like, but then you have to repeat it over like the 16 colors of stained glass, for example. I have a 32 pixel glass texture that I really like, that I'm not using right now because it doesn't work with my connected texture mods. But when I was building that and I finally got it to work, and you're like, okay, cool. But then it's like, oh man, I have to do this like 16 more times. And it's not the most exciting thing, like it gets very repetitive. So there's a lot of grind work and there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of trial and error, I feel, especially when you're dealing with traditional, 16 pixel sprites for these block textures. And like 1 pixel can make a big difference, and it gets very, very finite very quickly. So it's definitely a cool process to see stuff like that happen. And I think that's also something that has to be considered now, even though it's always been a big deal adding a new block or adding a new texture to the game. Like, how does that work on its own as what it's supposed to be? How does that then work with other blocks in the game, other blocks of the same hue, tone, etc.? But now it's like, well, what does that look like under vibrant visuals? And you have to understand that not everyone is going to run vibrant visuals. They may or may not like them. And so now you've got 2 different ways to view every single texture in the game, which is just wild to think about all the different possibilities that you have to consider.
Yeah, is it a light emissive? Is it kind of slightly metallic? All that kind of stuff. Like there's a bunch of properties to consider. Yeah, and so I think while obviously it's been a while since we heard about vibrant visuals, and this is not necessarily like it's ready for testing. It's much more of this is a milestone on the road. At least it's reassurance to anyone who's been a little bit skeptical about stuff like this in the past. When a project kind of drops off the radar for a while, I think there are a lot of people in the community who are still quick to assume that no progress is getting made and it's going nowhere. And there have been graphical upgrades in the past that have been mentioned, but then ultimately have to be scrapped. And I think it's really good that they've at least put in an autumnal update for us to let us know that Vibrant Visuals is still on the way. So that's all stuff that you can check out on Minecraft.net this week. In the meantime, we're going to move on into chunk mail. If you'd like to email the show, the listener email address is, as always, spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Send emails into that address. Keep them short and to the point if you can. It really helps us include them in the show more easily. But let us know what you've been thinking about Minecraft lately, especially if you've got some personal ideas about snapshots and bits and pieces that are coming down the pipeline. It's always fun to read something topical. But today, we got one email, which Joel is going to read for us.
This is from Mint Refresh about sound design and builds. Hey, Joel and Pix. I'm a Minecraft pack creator. I just finished listening to episode 371, where Joel mentioned enjoying the break sound for shroom lights and that he wanted to be able to control it. Implementing sound design is a really neat way to elevate builds, especially given the current buildstone movement in the community, although they are currently limited in options. In my own mini block starter pack, I gave every mini block its own sound when placed on top of a note block, like mob heads do, so they can be used for adding sounds with redstone, like the clanging from a mini anvil or spooky sounds from a mini creaking heart. What opportunities for creating and controlling sounds would you like to see in Minecraft? Where do you see or where do you foresee utilizing them in your own builds. Thanks. I love listening to the show every week. Mint Refresh had been pranked so many times by the fuse sound from a mini TNT that he missed the sound of an actual TNT block and blew up.
Hoist by your own petard, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the thing is we're getting a little bit of a move forward with ambient sound in the game natively. Like we have little things like the creaking sounds that you get from, I think it's leaves and hanging moss being put together from the Pale Garden specifically. Like if you put those together, you get those occasional sort of, trees swaying in the wind kind of sounds, that creaking of wood, which I ended up using as ambient sound on the airship that I built, the one that's attached to the floating island.
Nice.
And like we're getting stuff like that from sand, terracotta, dead bushes, firefly bushes, that kind of stuff. And I think all of those are great, especially considering that they give players an opportunity to hide those in builds so that the source of the sound isn't necessarily visible, but still have it be part of the surroundings. I think the thing that players really crave that we don't have a ton of access to right now is stuff that doesn't feel natural to the Minecraft world. And I'll use the analogy of the blocks that we have right now. There are a lot of blocks that players use to represent something other than what the block is actually intended to be. Like with stone, for example, going back to the screenshots that Joel shared with us earlier about the builds on the Mushroom Island, there's an extent to which if you place it in a sci-fi environment, a stone block can be used to look more like a matte kind of brushed steel effect. Yeah. If it's against a background of like smooth white concrete and on this alien landscape, right? Whereas when you see it in cliffs and so forth, it's just going to look like stone. There are plenty of other examples of players using blocks to represent something other than what they are, especially when you get into some of the more talented builders using them for shading and, simulating light hits on a building where the lighting engine doesn't necessarily compensate for that. So what we don't have from the ambient sounds right now, at least not in the extent that I've been used to using them, is something that can be mistaken for something else, something that sort of creates the same illusion for the ear as some of these blocks do for the eye. And so if there was some kind of ambient clanging noise that sort of occasionally you hear in the background, or something like the cave noises that occasionally pop up, if there was a way of controlling those, then you could maybe have something that added to the ambience of a haunted house, or, a clanging noise could be just as present in like a dwarven forge or some kind of alien spaceship where there's meant to be, pistons moving and metal working in the background. And you could use that for a variety of different spaces. Whereas right now, I feel like the kind of swooshy, desert sand ambience doesn't really lend itself too well to a ton of other scenarios for me.
Yeah, I can't think of a sound that you could overlay into different kinds of things. Like, for example, the sound of copper golems interacting with chests and that kind of clang and sound that they have. If you had that hidden behind a wall, that works in like a factory, but it's not the same sort of clang that would work in a haunted house. It still feels very mechanical. Like you would still think about gears behind the wall, not necessarily something creaking around behind the wall. So yeah, it's tricky in that way. We actually have this data pack on the Sigil server, and I have not used the sounds related to it. It's the mini block pack we use for decorating. Like I used it in West Hill for all kinds of really great ways to use like small mini blocks for tabletop decoration, little devices, little boxes, jewelry boxes, but also things like stone and andesite mini blocks to put on top of walls because they line up perfectly. So they give you like that little bit of extra detail. Wood mini blocks on top of fence posts to make it look like a boat tie, like that kind of stuff is really, really useful. So I'm really curious now to mess around with the note blocks and see what I can get out of them, because one of the things that I've noted as a future project in the sci-fi area is we use command blocks to teleport to and from different zones on the server. It's a way for us, for people that might be listening for the first time today, to have builds about 10,000 or 30,000 blocks away from one another, so that my sci-fi build is not in Alistair's backyard where he's built a castle and kind of like ruin the vibe. Because I've got a large render distance. I render 22 chunks, I think. So I don't want necessarily neighbors that are in a different theme. And in some ways, and you can speak to this because you did the whole teleportation thing to the medieval area. We've got a landing area. Like you teleport to the medieval area and you're immediately in a building. And then you've got to walk a couple of chunks to get down to West Hill. And I feel like there's a bit of price as far as time goes. If you're flying or walking, you have to get to the teleport location, teleport, and then get to the nether portal and go about your day. Whereas right now with the sci-fi zone, because it's just starting, you walk up to the portal in the main hub in the overworld on the Citadel and press a button, and you're smack in the middle of your storage area for the sci-fi zone. So one of the things I thought would be interesting and as fun to experiment with as well would be to put a redstone delay between the button press and the actual activation of the command block, and have that also place some notes and have it ramp up, like start slowly, like a couple of thumps, and it gets faster and faster and faster, and then you're teleported. So there's at least some sort of payoff or ramp up or some sort of thing that happens. And I was thinking even that it could be a building unto itself. Like I could have lights flash around and then have all these different things happen, and then you get teleported. And now that I know that we've got different sound options because we are using the mini block data pack on the server, I'll see what kind of cool sounds I can come up with by combining or putting different heads, different mini blocks on top of note blocks. So that'll be fun to explore. But when asked to think about the kind of stuff that I would like to see in Minecraft, my brain went to ambient sounds as well. And I would love to have something like hums or mechanical noises, unique button noises, so that every time you press a button, it doesn't necessarily have that clunk. Like you might want to have it do something else. So putting the button on a different block would make a different noise. So for example, when you walk across amethyst crystal, it has that little kind of chimey noise, which is really pleasant. And I forgot all about it until I was mining all this amethyst. But it would be really neat if when you put a button on an amethyst block to activate your redstone circuit, it didn't just make the same stone clunk noise. It made like a chime or something. That could be really, really fun. I also like the idea of birds, squirrels, bugs buzzing, that kind of stuff. And creepy noises, as Mint Refresh mentioned, could also be fun. I don't know how you add those into the game and have them be controlled by the player. That's the only thing. We've got the bug noises with the firefly bushes, which you mentioned, but things like birds and squirrels and things are a little bit harder to come by and a little bit harder to move around. And also, to your point, are very specific. Birds are going to sound like birds. You can't take the bird noise and put it inside of a factory and have it not sound like birds, right? So it's not quite as useful. I'd be really curious to see what they can come up with for players to be able to have either unique sounds to note blocks or somehow more control over sounds. Because something that I've also been dealing with has been like the happy ghast that I made that I don't use, that's tied up near my place, will not shut up. Cosmic Dancer has labeled it the chatty ghast as opposed to the happy ghast, because it just mumbles constantly, and I need to stop it. And I know I have the data pack for silencing it, but I also might want to name it something else. So I think I'm going to download the mod that Donaraf mentioned, which is going to give us control over specific stuff. And so I feel like between mods and data packs, there might be some fun opportunities to have some sound in the sci-fi area, because I'd like to update some custom textures. Like, I feel like anything that's made out of wood that I'm using a lot of, like chests or barrels, they really don't match anything that I'm doing in the sci-fi area. And so it'd be nice to maybe retexture those. And if I go up to a barrel and I open it, it sounds like a wood barrel opening. And it would be cool to have that changed into some sort of sci-fi noise, which I've seen in other sci-fi resource packs. I just don't want to retexture everything in Minecraft. And I find that a lot of those packs, it's like all or nothing. Like it's a completely unrecognizable game, or you're just playing vanilla Minecraft and trying to make the best out of, what you've got for texture. So it's a delicate balance, but I definitely want to try to incorporate sound into the sci-fi area.
Yeah, I think it'd be really fun to have access to more almost like looping tracks of ambience, like something about the length of a music disc as well, because I think a lot of the individual sound effects in Minecraft are intentionally meant to be shorter, because you're only encountering them when like a mob gets hit or something. You think about the sound effects that are generated with a skeleton head on top of a note block, it's just the bony rattling noises that skeletons make when they're just kind of standing around, which could be some interesting ambience for like a graveyard build or something like that. But even that seems relatively short compared to just like a sort of rising hum or the sound of the wind whistling, or in the case of something like a spaceship, the sort of ambient like beeps and boops of like computer consoles processing data or something like that. There are a couple of those that folks on YouTube upload like 1 hour of space ambience that's just this sort of like soft kind of echoing noise in the background and like a little bit of that sort of electronic, it's nothing really, like it doesn't sound necessarily important, but I use that all the time if I'm running tabletop games with like sci-fi themes. There's this sense of something is occurring in the background, even if players aren't necessarily tuned into exactly what that is. They're not meant to be paying attention to it. It's just provides the ambience to help them get in the mood. And so I think that's part of what we could have in a game like Minecraft. And it's really, the problem comes with trying to find one size that fits all, because there are obviously going to be some things that feel very specialized, where the kind of beeps and boops don't make absolutely any sense if you're talking about building something medieval, which is the sort of realm of technology that Minecraft skews to more naturally, with the cobblestone and the grass and everything. So I do think it varies a little bit, but then even having something like crowd noise feels a little bit incongruous with Minecraft's more lonely, empty area, and you feel like a crowd noise would just be you get a bunch of villagers together, which already sounds just like a cacophony is happening anyway. And much like the Happy Gust, I'm sure after a while you'd just wish they would all shut up.
Yeah, I like the idea of what is essentially greebling, but for audio, right? Like that's kind of what you're describing, is like the
great way of putting it.
Little doodads and knickknacks and details that are on sci-fi ships that no one pays attention to. If you zoom in, it's probably like a knitting needle and a kid's toy sneaker turned upside down, all glued and spray painted, and it just kind of goes by so fast that you just think, oh yeah, it's cool, it's techno stuff, And the background noises you mentioned too are similar to the things that you hear in Star Wars, where like they're walking along some crazy gangplank that's got no railings, and all you hear is like this thrumming hum of like energy going by, and that kind of stuff, very similar to the sound of the Enterprise in Next Generation on TV. Like they always had that background kind of hum going to show or make it feel like you're on a ship, and that kind of stuff. They do sort of deviate from the medieval in the note blocks, where like you can get some 8-bit stuff, you can get some instruments, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What if instead of just having a single block on a note block, if you surrounded a note block? So in the same way that you have to like surround a conduit with a number of blocks to get the conduit power, if instead of just one block around a note block to create a single note, if you created like an encased note block, it would then create a ambient sound based on the block that it's around. So surrounded in amethyst, you're going to get some ethereal fantasy crystal-like noises. Surrounded in iron, you're going to get more clanging or technical stuff. Surrounded in redstone blocks, and maybe you get your beeps and boops, like stuff like that it's going to be so intentional from the player that it's just not going to happen by accident in the world and be weird. I think that could be really, really fun.
I really like that idea. I think one of the other issues with note blocks is that they don't have sustain as a property. Like, there's nothing to simulate you hold down the piano key for longer than like half a second. Yeah. And I think that's another thing that could maybe be added to note blocks if we're talking about expanding the system of sound effects along with it. That could be really helpful. Well, speaking of expanding systems, I thought we would take a look at the changes to Lunge and extrapolate out from there and think about how these mechanics could also apply to other stuff in the game, whether current or in the future, because Lunge now runs on hunger, or more accurately, it applies levels of exhaustion. And what that does, similarly to running, sprinting, I think the keenest example I can find is like sprinting on ice. Whenever you're like running and sprinting and jumping on ice, it consumes even more of the hidden saturation value that's in the background, which just means you get hungry faster. And then obviously once that hits your hunger bar, you start to see the hunger bar start to shake, and then the hunger shanks start to diminish. And that's now happening with Lunge. I had a brief opportunity before we started the show to hop into the snapshot and take a look at this. And I wanted to talk about the balance of the spear compared to the version that consumed massive amounts of durability with Lunge. And if this felt right, if it could be applied to any other existing game mechanics. And the sort of what-if scenario I have constructed for us is, does this really feel like enchanting when the enchantment it's applying is this related to the physicality of the player and not the physicality of the object. But we'll start by talking about the spear itself. Have you had a chance to look in the snapshot this week, or are you sort of busy with the Mushroom Island stuff on the Citadel?
No, when the snapshot came out, I was focused on the Amethyst farm, and I was so close to finishing it and so engrossed in the Redstone clock tutorial that I just kind of powered through, so I didn't jump into the snapshot. So I've not messed around with the spear at all. I've only just watched your videos or streams, and then Eximavoid. I've watched the snapshot updates that Eximavoid has put out too.
The hunger version works better. Like, I think it feels at least more logical than dealing massive damage to the spear, you know? Like, it now applies exhaustion, this affects saturation, it makes you hungry faster. I think this makes a lot more sense for it being largely movement-based, because it feels like the player is the one doing the lunging, not the spear. The enchantment allows you to use the spear that way, but it really feels like the player is the one doing the sort of running and the leaping.
Right.
And I think you can take this with a grain of salt because I'm not really a PvP person, but I think it still keeps things relatively balanced for PvP. I think the argument for it consuming so much durability was that players are going to use it to close the gap to their opponents, and there needs to be a significant cost for that because it's such a powerful thing to suddenly be up in somebody's face when spacing and keeping your distance is a lot of what needs to happen in PvP for the sake of like safety and these kind of clashes that happen. But I think because players will now have to manage their hunger so that they can have natural health regeneration, which in Java PvP feels like one of the most important factors to manage, I think it makes sense that the lunge still comes at a pretty significant cost. And if you've had like a couple of steaks beforehand to kind of fill your hunger bar, but also add a lot of saturation in the background, you're going to find that you still need like 3 or 4 lunges before you actually notice the impact on your hunger bar. So it's still possible, if you're careful with how you use it, to do a few lunges before you ever sort of start to have to top back up again with the hunger. And I think that makes it good for the parkour aspect of it, which is where I expect a lot of players will want to use this, is that when you're flying around kind of from jump to jump, if your spear durability was decreasing dramatically throughout, for one thing, it would mean that you had to make sure it got repaired mid-course in order to continue if there were going to be that many jumps in it. And secondly, if it broke mid-course, then you'd have to make sure that there were more spears available with the lunge enchantment. And of course, having to enchant that many things, probably at level 30, means that it's going to take a lot of XP and a lot of potentially wasted materials. Also, whenever anything has netherite attached to it, then there's that additional price tag of this comes from a fairly finite resource and you wouldn't really be able to get hold of a lot of it. And so, yeah, I felt like the durability problem was an issue, whereas now with hunger, it's a lot more feasible for you to top up your hunger mid-parkour course. And a lot of players will be doing that anyway because it's mixed in with the running and sprinting. You're probably falling and taking a little bit of damage here and there. And between that and timing your jumps and making sure you've got enough energy left to sprint, if you throw lunge into the mix there, then it's just about eating mid-course. And players are always going to have food on them. They're not always going to have a means to restore XP and mend a tool, right? You go to specific locations for that more often than not. So I think that makes a lot more sense. It also means all tiers of spear are viable to put lunge on, whereas it would completely break a wooden spear in one use if a wooden spear had lunge 3 before this. So I think that's really valuable for it. And it also prevents one of the issues that I had with it to begin with, which is that if you carelessly happen to left click, or you left click but you miss your target, you're not penalized for it to the tune of 128 durability anymore. It just means you maybe have to eat one more golden carrot than you had been eating already. So I think in terms of gameplay balance, that seems like it's a lot more like up to spec with what I was expecting. At first, when I saw how much exhaustion it applied, I thought, well, that still feels pretty harsh. But now having actually played with it, you're getting maybe 7 lunges in before you reach the point where you can't sprint or lunge anymore, when you've just got like 3 shanks worth of hunger left. And that seems like, okay, I just eat 2 steak and I'm basically back up to full hunger. So that means health regen happens, but it also means that you can lunge a couple of extra times and start to manage things from there.
Yeah, when I first talked about the spear changes on stream, it was because we just kind of quickly went over the snapshot, and a couple of people in chat had chimed in and saying like, "Oh, so it still feels like they don't want it to be used for traversal." And I kind of misremembered that there are 20 hunger points, not 10. And so
Yeah.
when it was to take 3 hunger points, I was like, "My gosh, like that means that it's gonna take a while, or like it won't take very long at all to get hungry again." And I wonder though, how does it feel when you're roaming around and using this lunge to quickly jump from block to block, but then you've got to stop and eat? Like, does it feel like you're removing the momentum or removing the vibe from it? Or are there enough uses of lunge before you have to eat where you're kind of like, okay, no, this feels pretty good. Like I was able to lunge, like you said 7 times or something like that before you have to eat
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, it seems to me pretty reasonable, especially considering that previously, Lunge 3 with 128 durability, you could maybe get 15 or so lunges before you break like a diamond spear or a netherite spear. So this feels like, you gotta eat 4 steak or like 5 or 6 golden carrots, and golden carrots obviously were going to restore more saturation behind the scenes. So if anything, they'd be better. Besides that, you've also got things like honey, which you can drink to fill up your saturation without needing to have like a little bit of missing hunger. Like if your hunger bar is full, you
Right.
can still eat certain foods. Suspicious stew is another one, and that has a saturation variant of it. So, like with the right kit, you could imagine using lunge much more effectively throughout like a parkour course. Separate to that, though, I think it doesn't really kill the momentum any more than running out of hunger because you'd been sprinting and jumping a lot would. And a lot of parkour courses, while they rely on stuff like precision jumps, so they're less like, super fast kind of motion through the entire thing, and running out of hunger isn't always a concern. For the folks who are, falling, taking damage, returning to the start, going again, trying to sprint their way through certain courses, or just trying to hit a better time than they managed before, that those people are going to be managing hunger more frequently because damage is one of the things that reduces your or like piles up exhaustion, reduces saturation in the background, and requires a lot in order for you to heal. And so that's going to contribute to the equation as well. So when I'm doing parkour, like on Misadventures, there are a couple of parkour courses that I do pretty regularly, in Lost Crypt, I would always be going through food with those because I was always falling and taking damage and kind of having to loop back around again. So it doesn't feel like it's adding in a system that players aren't already used to managing. Whereas with the durability decrease, it really felt like players were going to have to account for how much durability this was taking and find some way to compromise, to bring some sort of like bottles of enchanting with them or something like that.
So do you still have damage happening to the spear if you hit someone with lunge? Like, does it still take
Yes.
durability then? Right.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, I haven't done a ton of like PvP or PvE combat with the spears, so I don't know for certain, but I presume if used as a weapon similar to hitting something with a sword, it still decreases the durability, but it doesn't decrease it just for using lunge if you
Right.
don't hit anything. Yeah.
And that balances out the difference, as you mentioned, between like using a iron spear versus a diamond spear or a netherite spear. Like if you're just using it for lunge, it's you and the hunger bar that's getting the demote or the not the damage, but like the cost is on you, not on the item. And
Yes.
so you can be running around as 2 players in like a PvP situation with 2 very different spears, but you're both able to move the same. It doesn't give one a greater advantage over the other, which would be like a more powerful, hard hitting spear, but then also faster or better or more lunges or whatever. It evens the playing field a little bit more in that way.
Yeah.
So it seems like they're doing a decent job to balance it, and certainly feels like they listened to a lot of the feedback that I mean, not just you, but I think other people also had when the spear was first introduced in terms of like the durability and usefulness of it. I'm still holding my breath for being able to use the spear in something like a dispenser. I think
Yeah.
that's gonna be really cool, and I don't know how that works. Whether similar to using shears or other things in a dispenser or dropper, whether it will take durability only if it hits something, or
Hmm.
will it take durability just by poking the air? I'm hoping not that. Like I'm hoping that we could use it aesthetically and visually for something cool, but then only have it be something that takes damage if it was used in, say, something like a mob farm. If people were using it to kill mobs, then you wouldn't want it to last forever. Like similar to shears in a sheep shearing farm, you'd want the shears to eventually have to be replaced. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and shears and dispensers existed separately for a long time before they were combined, and so even if we don't get spears and dispensers having an interaction with this gameplay drop, there's always a possibility they could add stuff like that in future if it's just out of scope for the feature set they have in mind. But I agree. I think having a durability decrease once the spear hits something means that you could still use them for cool effects. You could still have like, a floor of spikes that players can observe before they end up like trying to run through it and time when the spikes are going to appear and when they disappear. I've seen so many like fun puzzles in dungeon crawlers and stuff that use that kind of mechanic. I think it's a shoe-in for Minecraft dungeon design. I think it'd be really, really fun to have something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's as old as the old Mario games. Like, the floor shifting and revealing spikes, and then shifting and being flat and safe, and then revealing spikes again. Like, you've seen those all over the place.
It's a classic kind of platformer feature. You could see folks like when Tango did Decked Out 2 in the second in season 9 of Hermitcraft, he had floors like that would pulse with lava in dispensers that would kind of like pop up like that. So there'd be this sort of wave of lava that travels down a corridor. I can see them doing something really similar with like spears, and could even be like spears of different tiers as well. So like the wooden ones don't do as much damage as the diamond ones do. And so there could be some sort of adjustment there in terms of the difficulty required to get through them, or even randomness. If you put a bunch of different spears of the same, like of different tiers in the same dispenser, which one's going to hit you is going to determine how much damage you take. So it's a bit of a gamble in that way. Lots of fun to be had with that. I still love the idea. But in looking at this week, I was thinking about the contrast between Lunge and Riptide still, because it still feels odd to me that the movement feels sort of similar. The Lunge feels like a physical sort of running dash, whereas Riptide feels like something that the weapon itself is providing to you. And like to that extent, I consider Riptide to be a more magical effect, while Lunge feels to me more like a physical skill. And I think it's kind of strange that the two of those are applied using an enchanting table, but they have a similar enough effect, but they have very different outcomes. Riptide still uses a single durability, is omnidirectional, can only be used in water, that kind of stuff. There are certain parameters governing that. And Lunge feels like a horizontal dash, similar enough to Riptide. It still has to be applied as an enchantment, but it feels like something the player is doing. And I wondered if this could justify, this is the sort of what-if scenario I mentioned earlier, splitting physical skills like this into their own system and separating them from enchanting, which is something that I've considered recently because of the amount of bloat that is becoming present in the enchanting setup. Like, I do think that every time a new enchantment gets added, it just decreases the viability of enchanting overall, because you're always looking for specific enchants, and what you're getting is more random enchants if you're enchanting, say, a book. And so to prevent that, or at least forestall that slightly, I was wondering if, let's say, for example, because people always rave about this, the fletching table could be used to apply physical skills to a weapon. And some of the things that we already have as enchantments could be considered more upgrades for a weapon, or upgrades to sort of the player's physicality, rather than being inherently magical in nature. And this could still cost XP levels, because it takes experience to master skills like this. It's still like an abstract system that has some viability for what we're talking about here. But I was sort of wondering if enchantments that you could consider more physical, like the first one I thought of really was density, which is a mace attribute that makes it, harder hitting the further you travel downwards. Like it basically multiplies or adds to the amount of downward momentum, multiplying the damage that you do with a mace smash attack. And I think it makes sense that it would take more hunger points to wield a heavier weapon. So similarly to how having Lunge is increasing the amount of hunger it takes, density could do the same thing. You also have other things that I would consider more physical attributes, like knockback or punch. Those seem a bit more related to how hard something is hitting a target, rather than it being like a magical effect, like setting the target on fire or poisoning them or whatever. Other ones I thought of were quick charge. You could even go to stuff like power, sharpness, impaling, piercing, the stuff that sort of increases the damage or causes it to do damage to multiple targets. And I would argue that while sharpness might be the sort of mundane effect that just targets everything, it feels like the sword itself has been sharpened rather than the magic making it sharper. That doesn't feel as realistic as, say, smite being a magical effect, because naturally, dealing more damage to undead things feels like, it's holy magic in the sort of Dungeons and Dragons nature of it all, and so it feels natural that would be a more magical effect. Bane of Arthropods is kind of neither here nor there. But then there are obviously some enchantments that are obviously more magical. You've got things like Fortune, Frostwalker, Channeling, Mending. Like, all of that stuff feels a little bit more magical inherently. But I was sort of wondering if, with something like an additional workstation or using the fletching table to do stuff like this, some of those more physical properties could be split out from enchanting, maybe still mutually exclusive with other properties of the same type, but it could be a slightly different system. It could be something where, for example, you start with tier 1 of an enchantment, like sharpness, for example, but then you have to use it a bunch before tier 2 becomes available, and it becomes more like a series of incremental upgrades rather than you just get everything piled onto it all at once. And maybe that offsets some of the enchantment repair cost kind of calculation, where inevitably to get all of the enchantments you want on a sword, you're having to combine different books and combine different swords, and all of the cost of that adds up XP level-wise, whereas if it was something that you could just improve incrementally without there being a ton of additional anvil repair cost, that also means that the thing lasts longer. And it feels to me like if Lunge is going to take some hunger from the player and have that sort of physical connection to the player's physical state, then it sort of makes sense that other properties that seem similar would end up doing that as well.
It almost sounds like a skill tree. Like you'd want to have
that kind of thing.
A skill tree, but maybe like if you had it for the player, then that wouldn't make any sense, because then if you died and you lost your sword, then your new sword would just have all of the attributes that your old sword did, which kind of goes against how Minecraft has it set up. So you almost want to have the individual weapons have a skill tree. Like you put the sword in the smithing table, and then it opens up a UI where like, okay, well, like if you want to spend some XP on sharpness or sweeping edge or like whatever, unbreaking. I guess unbreaking is one of those ones I think you said that might split the difference, because like it could be magical, but it could also just be physical, like you're just reinforcing the weapon physically. But I like that distinction, and I think that, like you said, it reduces the amount of stuff on the enchanting table and has that stuff make more sense. I feel like I've played something in a mod pack where just by using the sword or the pickaxe or the shovel, it started to level up. I feel like there was a system in one of the mod packs that I played, or maybe I was watching someone play it, where it was almost compounding how frustrating it was if you died and lost an item. Like if you lost your pickaxe in lava, it's not just that you can go back and enchant it to get it back up to where it was. It's like, oh, on top of that, I was also using it for like several hours, which meant that it was better at mining certain things, or it had a better speed because it was more used in terms of my skill with it had gotten better. But I can't remember whether that was applied to the weapon or whether that was applied to the player. And if it was a mod pack, chances are that it was applied to the player, because it would make that easier. Like if you lost your pick, you're like, oh, well, whatever. I still have like level 7 mining with my pickaxe, so all I need to do is make a new pickaxe, and I'm still at level 7 mining. And losing the pick didn't remove my knowledge of mining. So I think there could be some fun stuff. I think with the amount of time that people put into Minecraft, having skill-based trees or other things like that be tied to use could be interesting. I don't know how it would then interact with other systems in the game, but I think on its own, I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I sort of wonder if you could load up this imaginary workstation with experience, and it could also double as sort of experience storage in that way as well. But then that experience could go towards justifying like, okay, when I come back here with a fresh sword, I can already put sharpness 4 on it instead of having to start with sharpness 1 every
Right.
single time and work up to it,
Yeah.
right? Like you could lock in the level of sharpness that you wanted for the future in the same way that you save enchantments when you know you've got a good one on like a book, but you need to go and get 30 levels and then come back. You could kind of do something along
Yeah.
those lines. And then maybe you could use it as XP storage, and then when you break the fletching table or whatever, you could get like 30 levels back, or you could get like a small amount of levels back with a slight deficit for having broken it or something along those lines. There could be some game applications of that. You could even use it to mend tools if you had mending as well, and just kind of store XP for later. There could be some fun to be had there. But I sort of like the idea. I think there are still a few flaws with it. For a start, the fact that you have to so deeply modify a system that players are already used to with enchanting, that's going to be the hardest thing to really rock the boat with. And that's one of the reasons I kind of hope they start moving stuff out of enchanting sooner rather than later, because eventually we're going to be left with enchanting as a system that has all of this stuff added to it, and players are going to be resistant to the idea of any of that moving to a different system. And so I worry that eventually enchanting is just going to become something that feels so incompatible with players' playstyles, or it doesn't feel usable anymore because of the amount of enchantments that you have to wade through to get the stuff that you want. But that's sort of the main thing I imagine being a problem with a system like this. The other system being like, justifying it based on the inclusion of Lunge, should the game then balance all of these physical skills with additional hunger cost the way it does with Lunge? And I would argue yes, but that also means a pretty severe penalty for what most people would consider fairly essential enchantments like sharpness. So if your sword was sharper, I mean, in theory, it should take less effort to swing rather than more effort to swing. So
Right.
I sort of wonder if maybe there should be less of a hunger cost for swinging a sharper sword. But like those don't currently take extra durability the way Lunge did before they reworked it. And so if anything, applying hunger just because it felt like a physical skill would just feel a bit like a nerf to pre-existing enchantments the players are already used to using. So again, I can see why that might get a little bit of pushback. I was also thinking about stuff like Depth Strider. Like, where does Depth Strider fall in terms of it being an enchantment versus it just being you're better at swimming because you've got like an enchanted set of boots or something like that? But the reason it feels like an enchantment to me is not necessarily because it helps you move faster in water. It's because there isn't a penalty for you moving faster in water. And so you sort of wonder, if it's linked to just helping the player swim faster, does that mean the player is expending more effort and therefore they should get hungry faster? I can see myself getting pretty irritated with that. But I think the overall thing, just to wrap this up, I wonder if the knock-on effects of splitting physical stuff and more magical stuff into two separate systems could be slowing down the bloat in the enchanting system. It could potentially rebalance repair costs, like I've already mentioned, but it could also prompt a rework of systems like hunger and saturation, because it would support the player's hunger dropping more through these kind of physical effort skills, and that could give them an excuse to revisit food. And food is another one of those systems that we felt for a while. A lot of this stuff is just sort of arbitrary and used for role play, and like, so you can scrounge bits and pieces of food in the early game, but then you stick to one food source virtually forever after that point. Like, I haven't eaten anything other than golden carrots in the Minecraft Survival Guide since I've had my villager trading hall. I can just buy them from farmers. And the same, I imagine, goes for people who have a pretty well-established cow farm and just like to eat steak, or anybody who's got an automatic chicken cooker. Those are kind of the three in my brain that, like, I don't ever really stray outside of that unless I'm doing it for an advancement, or I'm doing it because, I want to justify having, like, enchanted golden apples or something like that, maybe. But I wonder if maybe if they're looking at things like the Lunge enchantment using more hunger, if they want to revisit how hunger works and maybe make a couple of adjustments there, both to make sure that it remains challenging for PvP players and people who are going to want to use the spear as a skill-based thing, but also for people who are planning on using it casually so that they don't run out of hunger and just put the spear down and go, well, I'm never using that again because it felt like a bit of a pain to use. So I'm wondering if that gives them a decent excuse to rework hunger as well.
Yeah, I it's not something that I run into a lot. I will sometimes be running around my builds and realizing, why am I so slow? Oh, it's because I've got 3 hunger chunks left and I'm just not able to sprint anymore. And I feel like the internal eye roll of like having to stop and eat like a couple of golden carrots to get myself back up to where I can run again. Very often, because how eating slows you down when you're moving around on foot, I will take off into the air and I'll just realize I'm hungry, but it's just like, whatever, I'll deal with the slowness until I have to turn and fly somewhere. And then I will stock up and eat more food while I'm flying through the air, because of course it doesn't hinder your flight. And so I find that I manage hunger begrudgingly in Minecraft. It's not something that I enjoy doing. It's not something I think, oh, that's cool. Like you, I started off with a chicken cooker early in the game. And then once we got the zombie piglin farm up and running, we use golden carrots. We've got carrot farms all over the place. A lot of people just have them in their own, farms and areas. And then you just go to get your levels and your gold at the same time. And there's usually enough gold produced, even with the revisions to the zombified piglin farm, that you can get about a stack of golden carrots with one visit without too much time involved. Go make a cup of tea and you'll get another stack of golden carrots, which is enough. Like, I don't know if I've ever gone through an entire stack of golden carrots in one stream. I feel like I've certainly refilled my carrots, but like, did I start the stream with 16 and then eventually I ran out and then had to refill during the stream? Or did I start the stream with 64? And if I did, I don't know that I've ever had to like run. I don't know that I've run out. I've certainly refilled them, but it's like I refilled them because like, oh, I've got 8 left. I should probably refill those while I think about it while I'm here, not because I need to. Like, I'm not out. I'm just thinking to keep them stocked. And so, yeah, it's difficult to think about like where that line is. And I mean, even if there is a new food that changes the system or whatever, like, is it easy to make? Is it something that we can automate? Because if it's not something we can automate, chances are Minecraft players in general are just not going to go with it. Like, there's a reason why chicken, even though I think steak is better, is more often used, is because you can cook chicken with lava and you don't have to physically be there to do it. You can just stop by the chest, grab some chicken, and be on your way. And it's this golden carrots is very similar. There is a little bit of crafting involved, but they last so much longer that the little bit of crafting you have to do is worth it.
Yeah, and I think it would have to be like from the ground up a rework of how both hunger and saturation apply to most of these foods. If we're not going into stuff like potion effects on top of it as well, but either way, could be an interesting discussion for the future. For now, I think that's where we're going to wrap up this episode of the Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and the Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging at any of our paid tiers gets you an invite to our patrons only Discord chat. You can chat with other like-minded Minecraft players, listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday, and we also have monthly hangouts and a quarterly hangout coming up as well, so you can participate in both of those this next weekend or anytime you happen to be joining. We currently have 276 patrons, which is steady on from last week. There's always room for more. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons. That's Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, and That Penguin Dude. Thank you for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on your favorite podcasting platform, as well as video versions on YouTube and on Spotify. You can get the RSS feed on thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the program.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch when I can, probably a little bit less right now, but we're doing behind-the-scenes work for the YouTube series over there. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap. We just put out the Hermitcraft Awards show for Season 10, and we're going to be back for Season 11 very soon as well. You can find us through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
I'm Joel Duggan on social media. Very easy to find if you want to check out TikTok, where I post clips from the Twitch streams, or Instagram, where I share cooking and different life stuff. You can also follow me, of course, on Twitch at Joel Duggan, where I'm streaming 5 days a week, normally around 9 or 10 in the morning right now, which is a great time for me, and hopefully you are available as well. Putting a lot of time in on the Sci-Fi Island, and on Fridays, I'm building Lego and currently working on the Lego Game Boy.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and if you're hungry, I think it's lunge time.